to our workshop on professional ethics given by me and Dr. Sisalik here. We're going to try to introduce you to the concept, and everybody has some concept of what ethics is. But we're going to try to talk about a little bit more what is ethics and how does it apply to engineering and science and technology. It applies in different ways in different circumstances. And I always like to just put a caveat when I talk about things like this. And I'm not an expert on ethics. Most of what I know about ethics I learned preparing this presentation. There are people on this campus and other campuses, typically in philosophy departments or sociology departments, that actually study this topic as an academic discipline. And you can get a PhD in ethics. So obviously, I'm a novice. Probably Dr. Soslick also is, but we'll try to attack this, and we'll look at some concepts, and then we're going to work through some case studies just to give an idea of the kinds of things you might come across. Actually, even as students, you could come across these things right now in the SURE program. It's more likely that you're going to see them in graduate school or in your professional life. So anyway, what's the plan? We're going to talk a little bit about what is ethics. We're not really going to answer the question because I'm not sure there is an answer, but we're going to talk about it so we're all on the same plane. Then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this thing called the responsible conduct of research. What the purpose of RCR is. It's an NSF requirement, actually, and it's part of your ethics education in this program. In fact, I'll just say it's part of the ethics program that we're incorporating into this REU, and also because this is funded by NSF, we have to do this. And to be honest, I didn't really realize it applied to you guys because I thought, well, you're going to be here for 10 weeks. I actually have to go through this thing myself, which I haven't, and get this training. But I've got 12 months to do it. But it turns out that even if you're only here temporarily, you have to do this. So it's part of our workshop now. Then we're going to talk a little bit about engineering and science codes of ethics, which are sort of the principles that we're all supposed to follow. And then we're going to look at some case studies. We're going to do an example case study that Dr. Sisalik and I went through and sort of give you an idea of what we want you to do. Then we're going to break you up into groups and give you some cases that we've dug out of the literature. Have you go through them, and Dr. Sisalik will explain to you what you need to do, and we'll help you use some of these principles and apply them. Then you'll present your resolutions, and we'll have a final discussion. So one of the goals that was included in the proposal to NSF to fund this thing, one of the many things we said that we were going to do is have an ethics component. And so the idea is to help students gain a better sense of their responsibilities as engineering and science professionals. Whether you go into academia or you get a job for a company, you have a responsibility to pursue your career ethically. In fact, it doesn't matter what field you're in, whether you're working as a professor at a university or bagging groceries at Bilo, there are ethical considerations that will come into play. And so professional ethics is your responsibility, and it's assumed that you're going to conduct yourself in a responsible way. And it's like the old adage that ignorance of the law doesn't excuse breaking it. It's the same thing with ethics. You might commit an ethics violation and really not know that it was unethical, or that you were violating some rule, but that won't be an excuse. So it's all of our responsibilities to educate ourselves on these. In fact, I ought to do it myself more than I do. So in any case, and we also said in the proposal that the guidelines for ethical conduct must include a canon of commonly accepted principles of ethical behavior. This is codes of ethics. Otherwise, if everybody just does what they think is ethical or right, you're just going to have anarchy, and you won't be able to carry out your career in a, quote, ethical manner. You have to agree on some common principles. It doesn't answer every question that could ever come up, but you can base your answer on those principles. And then, so to understand this, we have to look at the accepted codes of ethics and also look at some examples of how they're applied. That's what we're going to try to do today. Okay, so I'm going to throw a couple of slides up. Some of them are our thoughts, and some of them are from the handout that I gave you. And this is a little philosophical, but I I'm thinking and hoping that maybe it'll put us all on the same plane, thinking about what this is. Because ethics means different things to different people in different circumstances and are applied in different ways in different contexts. And again, like I said, we could all go out and spend 10 years getting PhDs in this field and we still wouldn't know everything that there is. So I wanted to ask a question, sort of a rhetorical question, because it's not like an answer. It's not like asking a mathematical question. But what is ethics? Well, here's one very general formal definition. It's a branch of philosophy that involves systematizing, defending, and recommending concepts of right and wrong conduct. Of course, it has to be right. It came from Wikipedia. But it's a standard definition. And that's more an academic definition. If you were going to take a course in ethics, in fact, my daughter is a student here, and one of her general education requirements, she took a philosophy course, and the title of it was Ethics. And that's what they studied. It was an academic discipline. She had to study and do homework and write papers and take exams on ethics. So it was looked at as an academic discipline. But we need to go a little beyond that in actually trying to apply it in our careers. So this is what I pulled off this website, which I thought looked at this in a pretty good way. And it said several years ago, some sociologist named Raymond Baumhart asked business people, and we're all going to be business people, whether you're a professor or you work for a company, it's a business, especially if you work in industry. Whatever you're doing, you're developing a product or a service and you're trying to sell it for profit. And even as a professor, we're trying to sell our research and sell our courses. So it really applies to everybody in the professional world. And he asked the question, what does ethics mean to you? What is ethics? And here are some of the replies. And I think we can see how generic this can be. Ethics has to do with what my feelings tell me are right or wrong, how I feel about it. Ethics has to do with my religious beliefs. Being ethical is doing what the law requires. Ethics consists of standards of behavior our society accepts. I don't know what the word means. That's what several people said. Let me get out of this a second and bring up this Word document. And in this handout I gave you, he brings up several good points. Basically, all those are very, very flawed definitions of ethics, at least as far as professional ethics, in a professional setting would go, because they're very generic. So the first one talks about their feelings. Ethics is what I feel is the right thing to do. But the problem is feelings can be very subjective, and every one of us in here are going to have different feelings. And we could argue about ethical cases all day long and maybe never come to a conclusion. He says, a person following his or her feelings may recoil from what is right. In fact, feelings frequently deviate from what is ethical. So you can't really go into feelings. You'd have anarchy. So whose feelings are you going to go by, mine or yours? He said, nor should we identify ethics with religion. Certainly there's a connection between ethics and religion, and most religions promote things that we could say are ethical. But ethics applies as much to the behavior of an atheist as it does to those who are devoutly religious. Different religions have different ethical principles, so it can't really be identified with religions. Ethics, however, can't be confined to religion, nor is it the same thing. So you can maybe base it on that. In fact, many of our ethical principles are based on the Judeo-Christian faith, but you can't really base it on that, because not everybody follows that faith. It's also not the same thing as following the law, because laws, like feelings, can deviate from what's ethical. He quotes some examples here of pre-Civil War slavery laws. It was legal to own slaves, but it certainly isn't ethical. The same with apartheid in South Africa. We can come up with hundreds of examples where laws aren't necessarily ethical. And finally, being ethical, really, we shouldn't define it as doing whatever society accepts, because society accepts some very unethical things, like Nazi Germany, for example. So if we also consider being ethical as doing whatever society accepts, then to find out what is ethical, one would have to find out what society accepts by taking a survey. He uses an example, which I certainly don't want to go into, with the issue of abortion. If you wanted to decide what is my ethical view of abortion, you take a survey of the world or the country and look at the statistics and see what's the dominant view, and then that's the view you accept. Well, nobody ever does that. That would actually be absurd. In fact, he says, if being ethical was doing what society accepts, one would have to find an agreement on issues which, in fact, does not exist. In other words, you'd never find agreement. So then what do we do to keep things from being so subjective? And he gives two principles, which I think are pretty good. Two things we can do. Ethics means two things. It refers to well-founded standards, and even that's somewhat subjective. But you get a bunch of people together and you agree on standards of right and wrong that describe what humans ought to do, usually in terms of rights, human rights, rights of society, of business, obligations, benefits to society, fairness, or specific virtues. And even that is difficult to do, but at least if we come up with a standard code of ethics, we'll have something to follow that most people agree with. Also, ethics refers to the study and development of one's ethical standards. Yes, I'm being ethical here by quoting the source where I got this. So one of the things he says is we need to constantly study and review what we consider to be ethical because it can evolve and it can change. So it's still very challenging to precisely define. Even when we do adopt a code of ethics, they're very general and sometimes trying to figure out how to apply it to particular cases is tough. Sometimes it's straightforward, sometimes not. So one thing I wanted to throw out here, and I don't want to deviate on this too much, but Chad and I were talking about some of these a little bit. Some things, sometimes it's not really straightforward. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's obvious. You know, should I break into my collaborator's lab and steal his data so I can publish it as my own? I don't think anybody would argue that that's okay. But some things aren't so straightforward. You know, I throw out this rhetorical question, and if anybody wants to discuss this, we certainly can, but it's more of a rhetorical question. Is it unethical to lie? But at face value, we'd think, of course, it's unethical to lie. But is it always unethical to lie? Is it ever okay to lie? Is it ever more ethical to lie than tell the truth? Is it ever unethical to tell the truth? I'd answer that question, yes. I can think of at least one or two good examples where it would be terribly unethical to tell the truth. We'll come back to that in a minute if you want to discuss it. Another one we came up with, was it unethical to work on the atomic bomb? Was it okay for the U.S. to do it, but not okay for the Nazis to do it? Is it okay for both to do it? Is it not okay for anybody to do it? Is it unethical now to work on weapons technology? You know, you could debate this for years, and you'd never come to the proper conclusion. So it's a little bit not cut and dry. That's why we need codes. Does anybody want to tackle that question? And anybody agree with me that it is sometimes unethical to tell the truth? Any examples?
I guess medical history, you're not allowed to tell.
Well, not giving somebody information is not the same thing as not telling the truth. In fact, I'm saying, another way to say it is it ever the most ethical thing to do to tell a lie? Not giving out information. I mean actually falsely giving some information. I can think of an example where it's unethical to actually tell the truth. Not withhold it, but actually say something that's a lie. Well, what if you were a German citizen in Nazi Germany and you were hiding some Jewish people in your basement trying to get them out of the country so they could avoid a death camp? And a Nazi walks into your place of business and says, I've heard that there are some Jewish people that are being hidden by some of our citizens. You haven't seen any Jewish people running around, have you? And you know you've got some in your basement. And if you say, well, I can't lie, there are some in my basement, well then they'll get executed. I would say in that case it would be very unethical to tell the truth. It might ultimately end up costing you something very dearly, but there are times when you have to question, what's the right thing to do. Now, most of the time you should tell the truth, but there are occasions when.
What about Edward Snowden?
That's a good one.
So he told the truth, eh?
Right.
I think that one's open to debate.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of different opinions on that. And we could probably spend this whole period talking about Snowden. I don't know what the right answer is. I have mixed emotions. I have a little bit of leaning in one direction, because I actually used to work for the agency he contracted with, so I understand some of the issues. But still, it's not obvious. It's not cut and dry. At what point do you those things like he did, you know, in the interest of the public good. Also balancing the fact that you're entrusted with, you know, secrets that are very dangerous to put out there in the public. Anybody want to tackle any of these issues and discuss them? Or should we go on? Okay. Now we'll go on to something. That's the next slide. So the importance for engineering and science. I'm not going to steal Dr. Sosloff's thunder here on the codes, but just to give you an example, why is it important to us? Part of the engineer's creed, and it doesn't just have to be engineers, anybody working in science and technology, but as a professional engineer or scientist, I dedicate my professional knowledge and skill to the advancement and betterment of human welfare. That's a very lofty goal. So it's more than just doing good science and designing cool toys. You know, we're talking about doing work that directly affects humanity. So it's crucial for engineers and scientists to perform their work with the highest ethical standards. So it should be fairly obvious that why this is something important. And I think when we look at some of the cases, we'll see how it's often sticky. It's sometimes not obvious what the right thing to do is, and sometimes the consequences for doing the right thing can enter in. So we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, this was what I was going to say was a little exciting. It's not really being facetious, but I want to talk to you about something that we all have to do. And so you don't have a whole lot of time to do this, which is my fault, but you still have to do this. It's called the Responsible Conduct of Research. Sounds straightforward enough, but it's actual official title of something that NSF requires us to do. So the Recent America Compete Act requires that all undergraduate, that's